And welcome back, everyone, all of our listeners and viewers, to a podcast to answer your questions on addiction, recovery, and mental health. I'm Dwight Hurst, your co-host and a clinical mental health counselor. So honored once again to be able to be joining and be listened to and watched by all of you out there, but even more grateful to be here with a wonderful group of experts that we are always with, some of them, and one in particular who we are not always with, but are happy to be with today. I'm going to go around the virtual room here to meet our panel of experts. First, of course, we're joined by Clare Waismann. She's a registered addiction specialist and substance use disorder certified counselor. She's the creator of the Waismann Method opioid detoxification specialists and also Domus Retreat Aftercare. Hi, Clare.
Hello, how are you? How's everybody?
Doing good so far. And expecting to even do better. David Livingston's also joining us. David is a licensed marriage and family therapist and our program's clinical lead. He is a psychotherapist and a leading expert in the field of addiction and the psychological needs that are attached to that. Welcome, David.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Now, we are super honored today to have Mark Rosman joining us. Mark is a screenwriter and director with over 30 years experience working in the field, and also particularly working and telling stories of families. He's worked on many Disney projects as well as many others. He's worked on the show Even Stevens, Lizzie McGuire, the Disney movie A Cinderella Story, and also the Lindsay Lohan film Life Size. Mark, I mean, that's just a few that I cherry picked to mention. And Mark is here to tell us a little bit about his experience from years ago when his daughter experienced some serious addiction problems and the impact that had upon her and upon you, your wife, and your family. And we're honored to hear that and grateful for your vulnerability, as well as the current project that you're about to film called Keep Coming Back, which I believe is the first narrative film that's focused on the experience and how important parents are in the process of addiction, recovery, treatment, and all of those things. So, Mark, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you and to talk with Claire and David as well.
I feel like a good place to start today would be, Mark, just to ask you a little bit about the events and the feelings and thoughts that led you to pursue this current project. And we can talk, we'll talk about some of the general things you've learned as well. But what led you to write and start the film Keep Coming Back?
Yeah, well, I had been in the film business for many, many years. And as you said, making a lot of films that focused on families. Generally they were kind of comedies or, sort of fun adventure films. And here I was directing all these perfect sitcom kind of families like Even Stevens and Lizzie McGuire. And I started to realize, wait a second, there's actually a problem in my own family, which is that our only child, who was about 15 at the time, was clearly getting into substance misuse. And it sort of took both my wife and I by surprise. Neither of us have any addiction that we know of in our families. And so we were, taken by surprise and also in a very healthy dose of denial at first. Thinking the last thing this is has anything to do with drugs. It's really, we were much more willing to consider and look at possible emotional issues that she might be going through as a teenager, and focusing on that. But then things changed and we did start to focus on what the real problem was.
I think that's a reaction that we see a lot. Claire, you talked to lots of parents who contact the Waismann program as well. What do you see with that, reactions of parents in regards to denial and also adjustment?
I see often, like Mark was saying, that, the first thing is that denial, not my child. So, you start focusing on everything else but, and what delayed things quite a bit. Because you truly, even if it's right there in your face, you're always trying to look, around it. So usually until something happens that forces you to see what's really going on and accept it, you don't. And it's human. I mean, it's nothing, as parents, we are just not prepared for, such extensive issue. So it's normal, is human, and is something that makes us as parents grow, emotionally and as a person. So we start judging less, supporting more, try to understand not just our kids but ourselves more. So it's definitely a group effort.
There's nothing that attaches to like parental love, I think, more than fear emotionally as well. I know that when I look at my kids, and they get old, by the way, I don't know if anybody's noticed that, but they just keep doing that. It seems like every year or so they get a year older. But I still look and see those little kids, and it's scary.
Yeah.
It's fear and acceptance. I think acceptance is such an important factor. Regardless of what you're going through, especially with addiction. Being able to, be accepted by your parents and, supported through that difficult time in your life that, again, as parents, we don't expect, neither does the kid.
Yeah.
What was that process like for you and for your wife, Mark, that evolutionary process for you guys?
Yeah, so we had she had a child psychiatrist, and then we brought her to see a guy who we had heard was great with teenagers and really knew the drug world and all of that, and we brought her to see him, and he recommended to us that she's got some serious drug use going on. We've got to send her to a rehab. And we were still in denial about it. And we had a plan already in place to send her to a therapeutic boarding school, which we did. And for her senior year in high school, because she had been expelled from high school. And she went there. And about 3 months into that, we get a call from somebody at the boarding school who's at the emergency room with our daughter, who had downed a bottle of Listerine. And that's when we realized, okay, this is really a problem that we knew. Of course, she was dabbling in drugs, but now we realized this was serious and we had to do something about it. So we had her go right from there, basically from the emergency room to Hazelden, Betty Ford in Minnesota. And that was her first rehab. And that began the process where I would say, to follow up with what Claire is saying, I think that was our first moment of acceptance that we were dealing with, drug misuse.
What kind of emotions did you feel at that time, if I can ask? I mean, it's probably a cluster of different feelings at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, fear is right up there. I mean, it was, very scary to think that, our child could be going through this, and confusion about it, anxiety about it. That was through the roof, guilt, what did we do? How did this happen? And what's, our role in it at that point, thinking a little more negatively, like that we may have caused this in some respect. So lots of pretty negative emotions are just flooding through us.
I was curious for Dave. Yeah, David, what's some of your experience with that transition?
How old was your daughter at the time?
She was 15, 16 at this point.
Okay. All right. I'm just curious because it has to do with sort of the way I think about things. Where was she at in treatment? Like, was she wanting to go to treatment? Was she not wanting to go? How was that part of that whole experience?
Yeah, she was not wanting to go, but willing, if that makes sense. She, like, just starting with a therapeutic boarding school, she, didn't love the idea, but we drove her there, and that was okay. Going, I think, coming from the emergency room there, I think she was willing to go to rehab, but there was always, she wasn't on board with, oh, I need treatment. She was not there. She was willing to do what we were telling her to do, but she wasn't exactly, totally on board with it.
How severe was it? Was it dangerous? I mean, to the point where there's risk of life and death. How severe had it become?
Yeah, it was. We couldn't keep her safe, is kind of what they kept telling us. Yeah, I mean, she was dabbling in a lot of different things, and hard drugs was one of them. So yeah, it was serious.
I have a question that I think this is probably good for all three of you with the different perspectives. What would you see as important differences in types of treatment? Mark, you've touched on that you guys were engaging with just general emotional health, mental health, even that boarding school. It's not a low level of care, but at the same time, it wasn't addressing her actual needs. And we bring in like addiction informed care. And so throw this out to everybody. What are some of the important differences in the way that care is delivered?
Well, I don't know. In our case, it was, going right into inpatient for her, so residential, where she, was there full time. I mean, that's what I'm familiar with being the highest level, basically, of treatment. And so she was there for 30 days, and then and in her case at that time, she did come back to the boarding school and actually graduated high school, came back to LA, but then relapsed, and we sent her back to Hazleton, back to residential. But after that, she stepped down to what they, I think, used to call IOP, intensive outpatient, where, she's not living there, but she's going every day basically to a program and living in some kind of a controlled environment, like a sober living house. And so that's kind of what she did next. But, later down the line, after, in and out of various places, she ended up, we sent her to a long-term program that was on the East Coast, where it started, had all the levels, sort of started where, it's full on, you're in the most, concentrated sort of care. And then you kind of earn your way to living, not going to the program every single moment, kind of loosening, and then finally, eventually, living on your own and getting a job. So it kind of steps you down.
And then, David and Claire, what are some of your feelings about levels of care or types of care? I know that's obviously important to a lot of people out there, and it's a question I think we hear sometimes.
I think it's a complicated issue. In general, you want everybody to be on board, and that's not always possible. And so you're always assessing level of risk. And, sometimes people are dabbling in things and it's more experimental. Sometimes they're in trouble and they're heading for real danger, and that's a different world. And so you're assessing all of this, and you're also assessing their ego strength. You're assessing their network. There's so many factors that go into kind of how, you know, how vulnerable someone is, depending on many, many factors. And so and it's often confusing because you will hear so many different things from so many different people in the field. I mean, on and on and on. And, but as I've said on this podcast many, many times, since the biggest driver in compulsivity is perceived helplessness along with anger and frustration, you want to keep people out of feeling trapped and stuck, right? So sometimes when that happens, you'll tend to see more compulsivity or acting out in different ways. So to the degree possible, if you can get whoever's struggling with the addiction on board, right, they'll tend to internalize more of the treatment. They'll tend to participate better, you know, and you know, the perceived helplessness and the frustration tends to get lower. It's not always easy to do because sometimes they're resistant, they're in trouble, and so it's a complicated scenario and often very, very confusing and difficult on parents to sort of figure their way through it.
One of the things I really like to hear and love to hear, Mark, is that you guys kept trying when it was like, we need to have a change in this or a change in that or relapse and things. All too often people say, well, this isn't working. Just bag that and we'll just do something that's not treatment or something, or we take a huge break. And it sounds like that relates a little to what you're saying, though, too, David, is then the application of treatment, being aware and honest about how well it's working, can also help to shape what recommendation you might make. That individualization of, boy, if this doesn't seem enough, we should step it up. And and getting to know the person and what their level of readiness is as well. It sounds like those are all very important.
Well, we had some big help with that. We weren't just making these decisions on our own. We were lucky enough to be put in touch with somebody who was based out of Minnesota while she was in sober livings there. And he was and is like an addiction consultant. And he has a company called Clear Consulting. His name is Sam Dresser. And he really helped us to figure out what to do. And he knew all the places and met with our daughter, met with us, understood where we were at, where she was at. And that's how we got to this place on the East Coast. He presented a couple options, and we took one of them, and she went there, not only of the place, but he knew who the people who were working there who would be good to work with our daughter. So it was really helpful. And what preceded all that was she was back at our house, and we had our rules set up, and she broke the rule and relapsed. And on our rules was she doesn't get to live at our house anymore, and we kicked her out. And that's, one of the hardest things any parent can do is kick their child out of the house. But along with help from Sam, and we had started going to Al-Anon by that point. We were in a parent support group at that point. We were getting a lot of support and a lot of help. And it helped us to get to that place where we could say, no, you're out of our house, and to follow through.
There's a difference between taking ownership of our own choices as parents, right? And the role that we play in trying to, as you talk about finding a healthy way to approach what do we change about the way we're doing things. And then that initial feeling you mentioned before, which is guilt. Is this us? Did we do this? This is all our fault. How did you guys navigate the balance from moving from one to the other?
Yeah. Well, just getting to that point where there's a saying, put down the microscope and pick up the mirror. Just to get there certainly took a lot of work and time. We didn't just get to that immediately. A couple years into this and going to Al-Anon and having a lot of support, I'd say for me, the turning point came. We were at probably our fourth parent workshop. Every time she went to a different treatment center, they'd have a parent workshop, and we always went, no matter where it was. And this one, I started out, I was just at a point of total frustration. I remember we were in a group of parents, and the therapist asked everybody to go around and check in. Where are you at? Got to me, and I was like, I don't want to be here. This is ridiculous. It's not doing any good. It's, she's not getting better. I'm feeling horrible. And really, when I look back on it, I think that was my bottom. I had just kind of given up. And by getting there and vocalizing that, I think that in and of itself, to sort of admit that to a group of other parents and a therapist, it got me to the point where I somehow, things kind of opened up for me. And a statement that I kept hearing from other parents, which was, parents have to take care of themselves. And people would always respond to that by saying, yeah, yes, go to the gym, go to a spa, you've got to relax, you've got to do this. And that never resonated for me. I was like, come on, I go to the gym, it's not helping. It was at that moment I had hit my bottom, and I heard that statement again, and it finally clicked for me that what it meant for me was I had to put me first. That's taking care of me. I have to look at my own feelings. I was so focused, possibly codependent on my daughter's problems, and also my own issue was I wasn't setting boundaries because I was too afraid to lose her love. And so I had to, this was the moment that I finally realized, wait a second, what about me? How am I feeling? How can I put my feelings first? And that began my process. And my wife was doing a whole different process, but, or different specifics, but a similar process. And we, got to that place of, wait a second, let's look at ourselves. What are we doing that's, exacerbating this problem? And so for me, it was certainly that I had to learn to set boundaries. And when I started doing that and started to take care of myself and look at, one therapist always said, look at your side of the street. And when I started to look and clean up my side of the street, and my wife did the same, things started to open up, and a space really opened up for, I think, recovery to begin for my daughter.
So you kind of had to live in that space of the difficult feelings at first in order to evolve. You didn't run away, in other words.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that you were present when you talk about being in that meeting and not wanting to be there. It just hits me how much, when we're doing healthy things, we often aren't feeling it. It's not in the moment. And in the moment, it doesn't feel very good. And, but you were putting yourself in that place to experience that. And
it's good to admit that, I think a lot for me, I would never really admit that, and I'd kind of go along and stuff. But I think to really admit it to myself and to others really helped me get to where I needed to go.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious from David and go ahead, Claire, you first.
Mark, without, whatever you like to disclose, you talked about she went through a child psychiatrist. And what I wonder is, so we're talking a lot about treatment and, the process of treatment, the ups and downs about it. But the root of the issue, how that all came about, was there something that triggered her seeking substance? Was there a feeling, that she couldn't handle? Obviously being a teenager is hard enough. But the question is, was there something, above that, medically or chemically, that was missed, and she seeks self-medication.
Well, I don't know exactly, but it was a stew of things. There were certainly, you can look at it and say, oh yeah, there's a lot of contributing factors. She was adopted, so there's that, and there was addiction in her adoption bloodline. And she also had ADHD and was taking medication as a young kid with that. I mean, really started probably like around 9 years old or something. And that caused, just having ADHD, causes issues of, insecurity and low self-esteem, because you're the one acting out and you're being called on it all the time by teachers and stuff. So there's that stuff. There's sort of a stew of things that was going on. And,
Yeah.
and by the way, that psychiatrist, this was before we even sent her to the boarding school, said, I think your daughter needs to go to this place called Hazelden in Minnesota. And we were like, what? That sounded crazy at the time. So she was on it, and she was right. It was really us that weren't listening.
Gotcha. And after all the treatment, nowadays she's doing great, but is there, a psychiatric follow-up, certain medications to keep her at a certain mental level?
Yeah, she still has a doctor involved that she checks in with all the time, has therapy. And by the way, she's now been sober for 5 years. She's just doing great. And in fact, she's getting married in like a month and a half to a great guy. And we're really happy, really proud of her. And so it's a, can't say happy ending, but for now she's in just a great place.
Wonderful.
Her life's developing, and it seems like you figured a way to keep things moving forward.
Yeah, well, she certainly did. I don't want to take all the credit, but she certainly did a lot of work, and absolutely. And I think she really values her life right now and doesn't want to jeopardize that. But also, I, having, spent years going through this, I'm at the place where if she even were to relapse, I would not fall apart. She would not fall apart. She knows what she needs to do. I know what we need to do. And I know she would, it would be a bump that she would get over. So, I don't live in like fear that she's going to relapse. If it happens, it happens. She'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. And it'll be okay.
So many times people talk about relapse prevention with the idea that it's the end of the world. And as you just said, it's actually, I believe it's just as or more important to have the concept of relapse recovery with the possibility to say, well, what do we do if that happens? It's, we do what we do.
Right.
How did you find the relationship and the work that you did on maintaining the relationship through this process? That's a rocky road, especially when you're drawing tight boundaries, to have to look at how it affects the relationship that you guys have with your daughter throughout treatment.
Well, I would say when we started to change, our relationship with her got a lot better. I mean, just speaking for me, when I started to look at how I feel and starting to set boundary and just saying no, my anxiety level went way down because I wasn't worried about her reaction. I was focused on my own reaction, and that was huge. And once I started to do that, yeah, she pushed back, but I didn't engage with it. I just said no. And slowly our relationship actually got better. And it was the same with my wife. So it absolutely, got better by us looking at our own behavior, making changes. It was great.
David, would you comment a little bit on what you see as successful involvement of parents?
Well, I mean,
with treatment?
from what Mark's saying is everybody found a way to learn and grow. And so
Right.
that process, I mean, that is the goal of treatment, period. Really, it's for in multiple ways to learn and grow, to be able to look at things as they are, figure out what's going to make them better, and struggle, if you will, existentially until everybody starts to get better. And then, like as Mark says, as everyone learns and grows, there's more stability. And even if there's bumps in the roads or problems, the ability to manage it, handle it, know what to do, is far more in place. And that's the goal. So sounds really good.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm curious a little bit about how you arrived at the title of your film, Keep Coming Back.
Well, it's a good question. It's a saying that you hear at the in Al-Anon meetings, especially when a new person comes in and they share for the first time. We always end with "keep coming back," because, as they say, it works if you work it. And I feel like the title has many levels. It's just sticking with something. The whole film came about because, when sobriety was starting to take hold with my daughter, me being a writer and a director, I knew instantly I had to make a movie about this. But at first I was thinking about more of a typical movie that focuses on the addict, because the addict has got, the more dramatic, interesting life, colorful, that's for sure. And I didn't want to just make a film like that, because I feel like there's been, hundreds, if not thousands of films like that. And it just didn't feel like I was adding anything. And then that's when I, looked in the mirror and I said, well, wait a second, I'm actually a pretty interesting character for a film, because I go through this big journey from denial to not only acceptance, but change. And as I started to research more about it, I realized that there really hadn't been a film made, certainly a narrative film, that's addiction related, but doesn't focus on the addict. It focuses on what the family is going through. And so that's when I knew I had something that was really worth making. And that's what the script is about. It's about a father who has a 17-year-old who he finds out is, abusing drugs, and he's widowed. The mother had died 5 years ago. And so he's a single dad, and he's a busy director. I obviously based a lot of the things on our own family. And he sends her off to a rehab in Utah, and he's in LA. But then they call him a couple days later and say, you haven't signed up for the parent workshop. It's a 4-day workshop, and they require at least one parent to attend, or they're going to send the kid back to him. And he realizes he's got to go, and he's kind of against it. He's like, isn't it your job to fix our daughter? And the movie is about him learning that it's not exactly that simple. That the parents have to look at their own behavior and be willing to make some changes. And when they do, that often can open that space for recovery. And that's what the film's about.
It's interesting because in any good treatment, the therapist has to learn as much as I don't know about as much, but has to learn a lot about how to treat the person and how they're effective and how they're ineffective, and what they're doing that's not creating, that's not helpful, and the things that is helpful. And it's, and I think the worst therapy is when it is considered that I'm here, you've got the problem, and I'm here to sort of tell you what to do. It's usually the least helpful thing you can do, with a few exceptions. But so it's kind of what you're talking about. It's like, so she's trying to internalize and create a new environment internally, in some ways externally, for herself. And the same has to happen in some ways for, the people around her. And the more that happens, the more everybody grows and internalizes, and it just gets better.
There's the old sort of discipline within therapy. I remember was drilled into me during my training, which is to always remember that the client in the room has the expertise that's the most important. As in the therapeutic role, we've been trained for general knowledge, whereas they have the specific expertise and knowledge of themselves and their lives. And it occurred to me as we're talking about how either in a parent's shoes or in a professional's shoes, are we negating the great expertise that we can gain from someone who is so intimately connected to the person who's going through treatment? And are we respecting our own expertise as a parent and finding that empowerment that you've obviously found from saying my involvement can help, and even if the things I was doing weren't helpful, I can find the things that are.
Yeah, well, there's another great metaphor that I've heard from a therapist, which is, you send your kid to therapy or to treatment, and it's as if they're getting brand new white tennis shoes put on. But then when they come home, if they're coming back to the same place, it's all the mud and the dirt is still there. They're just going to get those shoes dirty again. The environment that they come back to needs to shift as well for there to be some real growth.
That's definitely.
Yeah. Well, I will say, it's a wonderful film that you're making, a wonderful experience. And I'm so happy to hear about how she's doing now, and as well as how you're doing now, and in relation to not only addiction, but to just the quality of life and the safety and security that she is enjoying. I'm excited to see the film as it moves forward and as it comes out as well. The whole purpose why we do this show is to get information out there and to help everybody to know about their own safety, security, happiness, health, and with such a scary issue as addiction. And I'm grateful and glad to see that you're doing the same thing through this film and sharing hope, which I think is the main part of anything that has to do with addiction. So thank you for that.
Well, you're very welcome. And the film is, we're still trying to get the financing together for it. And it's both a charitable deduction to donate to the film, or it's also open to investment. And you can see on the screen, the website for the film is keepcomingbackfilm.com. And even if you're just interested in checking it out and just following us, because we plan to shoot this early next year, and hopefully it'll be on a streaming service near you. But we still need some help to get it going. So if you want to check it out at the website, that'd be great.
I know it's a thing we've talked about a lot on this show. If you are spreading awareness or you're trying to help, there's a couple of ways you can do that. Here's one directly that you just mentioned, which is you can get involved and help if you are in a position to be able to donate to worthy causes, such as what you're working on with your film. I think that that's something people should definitely look at. If I always like to add, if anyone out there is not in that position, it doesn't cost anything to share on your social media. We're probably sharing a whole lot of things anyway. Might as well share something that is going to have good results as well as that. In fact, it may take time away from sharing things on our social media that maybe we're not, maybe we should think twice about as well. So that's something people can always do.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of information, as we're drawing up on today, I'm so grateful for what we've already shared. And we want to invite everybody out there to share with us as well. We want to hear from you and hear about the questions and the information that you'd like to learn more about in addiction, recovery, mental health, and related to all those things. You can reach us at info@opiates.com. Go to opiates.com to learn more about Waismann specialists, and also to reach us on social media. Anywhere we are at Opiates, where you can find us there as well. This podcast is a production of Waismann Method Opioid Treatment Specialists and Rapid Detox. The music we use for the intro is the song Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. I just want to say thanks again, and wonderful to be here with you, Mark, with Claire, David, and I've been Dwight as well here co-hosting with you all. Thanks everybody for listening. Remember to keep asking questions, because when you ask questions, you can find answers. And whenever you find answers, you can find hope. We will be back with you again very soon. Thanks everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Mark.
Thank you.